Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I am so glad you could join me for today's lesson. We're continuing to take a look at big names in the Bible. And for today, we're going to take a look at Nehemiah. Now there's a book in the Old Testament that bears his name, and it tells his story. The first thing to know about Nehemiah is that his name means God helps or God encourages. Hold that thought in mind for a while. Let's begin with Nehemiah's story. You may recall from some of our previous lessons that the Hebrew people were defeated by the Babylonians. And as a result of that defeat, many of the Hebrew people were taken from the land of Israel to Babylon. And there they lived for some 70 years. Eventually, Babylon began to lose its power and influence, and Persia became the dominant power. Persia defeated the Babylonians in battle, and thus Persia became the ruler of all of the people that Babylon had once ruled. One of the things that the king of Persia did is that he issued an order saying that all of the Hebrew people could leave Babylon and go back to Israel. They could go back to the promised land. And you may recall from our look at Ezra last week that many, in fact, did just that. They left Babylon and they returned to Israel. Well, Nehemiah wasn't one of those people who returned to Israel. In fact, Nehemiah had a prominent position in the court of the king of Persia. He was known as the king's cupbearer. Now that was an important job, and what that job entailed was this. Whatever meal was served to the king, it was Nehemiah's job to taste it first, to taste whatever had been prepared and put on the king's plate, to take a drink from whatever had been poured into the king's cup. The whole idea behind this was that if anyone should try to poison the king and kill him, well, Nehemiah would find out in the hardest way possible. He would eat or drink that poison and would die or get very, very sick. And that would alert the king that he didn't need to eat that kind of meal. Very, very important position. Well, while Nehemiah was serving in this position, some people from Israel came and they visited him. And they told him that the walls of the city of Jerusalem had still not been rebuilt. The Babylonians had destroyed Jerusalem. They had knocked down the walls, they had destroyed the temple, and even though the temple had been rebuilt, the walls around the city had not yet been rebuilt themselves. Now, this was very dangerous. Cities back then, all of the cities had walls surrounding them. That was to protect them from enemies and invaders. And so with Jerusalem not having any walls, they were at the mercy of whatever army or whatever people came and decided to attack them. Well, this situation grieved Nehemiah something terrible. He wept and he mourned for days when he heard about this. Well, the king of Persia took note of Nehemiah's grief and said to him, "Look, why don't you go back to Jerusalem? I'll write a special letter for you, and you go back and you begin the work of rebuilding the walls around the city of Jerusalem." Well, that's exactly what Nehemiah did. He went to Israel and he began the work of rebuilding the walls around the city of Jerusalem. Here's how he did it. The first thing he did was he made an inspection tour. He went all the way around the city of Jerusalem and took note of all the places where the walls had been completely torn down or where some of them were just partially torn down, where they were in disarray. And he made notes about what needed to be done. Then he assembled the people and he said, "Look, we've got a job to do. As long as the walls of the city are not up, we're at the mercy of whoever shows up here." And he encouraged the people to join him in this big work of rebuilding the walls. And so finally, the last thing he did was he just got the people to go to work. He put them to work rebuilding the walls of the city. Well, all of this went really, really well. But as you might imagine, there were some problems. There were people from countries that were not Israel. There were people from other countries who saw that Jerusalem was in the process of rebuilding their walls, and this disturbed them. They liked the idea of Jerusalem being defenseless. They didn't want to see those walls rebuilt because they thought, hey, if the city is weak and has no walls, we can attack whenever we want, and we can rob the people, we can take things from them, we can do whatever we want. And so those people sent people into Israel to try to make the people dissatisfied, discourage them, tell them that it wasn't worth the trouble. They tried to undermine Nehemiah's work. And then as well, the work imposed a financial hardship on the people. They were so busy rebuilding the wall that they didn't have time or energy enough to make a living themselves. So even though the work had started, it was in danger of falling apart. Well, Nehemiah did what he needed to do to fix the problem. The first thing he did was he made sure that the people would have enough to eat, would have enough to live on, that they wouldn't lose money by working on the wall. He made sure that everybody was able to take care of themselves. And then, to ward off these people who wanted to prevent the walls from being rebuilt, Nehemiah set guards all around the wall, and he made sure that no one was able to come and sabotage the work in the dead of night or at some other opportune time. So the result of all of this was that Nehemiah was instrumental in getting the walls of Jerusalem completely rebuilt so that the city could be safe and secure. So what does this mean for us? Well, I think the most important thing we can glean from Nehemiah's work is that God uses problem solvers. That's what Nehemiah was. He was a very practical person. He wasn't a prophet or a priest. He didn't write all kinds of flowery stuff that's in the Bible. He just simply figured out what needed to be done, and he did it. And that shows us that God is interested in using all kinds of people. And in particular, God likes to work with people who can solve problems, who can fix things, who can get things done. And that's how Nehemiah lived up to his name. God helps or God encourages. God sends people to get things done. God helps people by sending leaders to solve problems. That's very important. And the truth is, you can be one of God's servants anytime you put your mind and your heart to doing the work of solving problems, of helping people in very practical and necessary ways. You don't have to serve in a church, don't have to do anything extraordinary except use your gifts and abilities wherever you are, and you help others do what needs to be done. That's what Nehemiah did, and that's why he is named God Helps and God Encourages. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's lesson. As always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me by email, you can give me a phone call, whatever. I'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you. That's it for today, so I thank you again for joining me, and I wish you the very best for the rest of this week, and I'll see you next week. Take care.